Welcome to the stage, Jer. Hi, Jer.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. If you hear noises that sound like a 6-year-old at bedtime in the background, that is a 6-year-old at bedtime.
Noted. Yeah, so we have some questions coming in. Should I just jump right in?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's jump in.
All right. So Amanda McCulloch said, I love the physical installation examples. Are there more micro examples where you think that approach can work well?
Yeah, I mean, micro is an interesting question because I think it's the scale of those things that make them work. In combinations with the publicness of them. But I think there are lots of ways to make physicality work well in understanding data, even when you're doing sort of sketching, as we heard from Leah. Lego's like an obvious one that people have used in the past. Cardboard boxes, stuff like that can be really interesting to experiment. When I'm working with my students on data projects, I often get them to imagine what their work might look like at vastly longer timescales, or to imagine what their work might look like if it were placed in physical space. Not because they're going to end up doing those things, but because it's going to help stretch their brains out a little bit. And because we are so fundamentally constrained by what we think about as far as time span and size, that like blowing those expectations out really helps you exercise your brains in ways that you might otherwise have. So even the micro examples might just be the ones that exist in your brain.
Sure. Yeah, because like in terms of time, like you were talking about with the glaciers, for example, that like that kind of thing could easily outlive you.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. Assuming the project is still. Yeah.
That's a real challenge of understanding how glaciers recede. Like you can see it in time-lapse photography, but not when we go look at them. It's happening at a time scale that is so different. And even sort of day-to-day changes in the city that you live in, it's part of what we do. It's part of what our brains do, is we adjust to change. And so it can be hard for us to notice that change unless we like build in a way to notice it over time. I'm a bird watcher, and if you really deliberately think about how birds are changing in a city or a park over time, then you get this idea of how the world is changing in a different scale than it's really impossible to achieve usually.
Yeah, I mean, because as a birder, you're looking out for various types of birds more than most people ever notice them, and so you're probably noticing like, oh, certain types aren't around anymore, or are less here, or sorry,
less. I mean, it's an observational practice at the root of it, which is another thing that I love to build into designers, is like a kind of these longer durational noticing practices of noticing, because it helps you, I think, find nuance in your work that can otherwise be elusive.
Sure. Has anyone cataloged the outcome of Natalies Walnut work? How are the trees doing in the statistical sense?
Well, I write about that a lot in the book. There's a chapter that's about the project mostly, and there is almost no record of them, and that was surprising. I'd seen Natalie. She spoke actually at the first I/O back in 2010, and I thought this project was so amazing that when I sat down to kind of write the book, I knew I wanted to write about it. But the website was made in 1999, and as you can imagine, a website that was made in 1999. There's tiny little images. Most of them were broken, and actually now the website doesn't exist. You can find it through the Wayback Machine or the internet, or on the Internet Archive, but you can't really find it elsewhere. And so I had to kind of scrape together some detective work about where these trees might be, and I didn't get a chance to find a lot of them. It's kind of unclear where a lot of them are, and there might be more of them. It'd be fun to kind of crowdsource that map in San Francisco, but I can't remember exactly how many I found 6 or 7 pairs of them. And really the project works. There are places where the trees are these grand and beautiful things, and there are places where they are these much smaller things. And then there's the absence of trees. Like there are places where I know those trees we know for a fact because I have photographs of them. And now there's like a new condominium building or something like that. Or the sidewalk's been repaired and the trees have been removed. And so that in itself is its own kind of illustration of this. The two probably most beautiful trees I found were in the Mission, in this place where now it's like billionaire by billionaire by billionaire, on these streets. And so the trees kind of they represent that, but they also represent maybe that huge amount of change that happened in that neighborhood. It's really standing sort of across the street and watching these trees, and I was like taking photographs, and people were looking at me like maybe I was paparazzi or something like that. Yeah, I mean, I've been to San Francisco a lot, but the trees let me read the city in a way that I had never done before, and it really left me kind of sad, actually, about the project being invisible. And I write about that in the book, about how actually there's another question about web work and time scale that is like, how long does our stuff last? And in many cases, it's very, it's very brief. It's very fleeting, and that could be a nice thing if you embrace it. But it can also, if you're trying to build projects that last for a long time, it can be really challenging to do so without, the grand budgets of projects that are built in public space.
Yeah, totally. Somebody made a comment about the trees, like searching for walnuts, a collaborative hunt for physical data, which I thought was a fun comment. Yeah.
I love it. It's actually, if you look online, you'll find a blog post by an arborist whose name I can't remember, who was one of the first people to sort of go, hey, remember that weird project that happened? Let's go find some of these trees. And so that was a lot of the source of my own work. But then I also went back to the website and stared at these little tiny pieces. And one of them was planted in the courtyard of an elementary school, and they had been recently renovating, and I couldn't find the trees, but I did see these big rounds of wood that had been turned into kind of stools in the garden. It's like, oh, that's probably the chestnuts right there.
Sure. Yeah. Another question. Do you have tips for encouraging a viewer to slow down when presenting work in a digital, low attention medium like the web?
Yeah. Part of why I wanted to give this talk is because I don't understand how that works. Like, I don't understand how we can slow people down enough to get into this time frame, of even days, but longer than that it's sometimes, I don't think I'm a particularly fast learner. And sometimes it takes me to kind of settle into especially if it's a tricky concept, whether that's a mathematical concept or a philosophical one. Like, it kind of takes me a while. And I was thinking about a couple things. Those climate stripes, for example. I think the climate stripes work because we've seen them over time. Like we see that repeatedly, and I think in some cases, I think like The Economist has done a great job during the pandemic of making graphs that look the same. That helps people fasten on to these things over time. So that's like one way that we could do that is even though we know people are consuming our work in 30-second intervals, we can kind of take advantage of the fact, maybe don't force them to relearn again every time we're doing it. And to maybe suggest engagements that work like that, like okay, let's do this piece, but instead of doing it once, let's do it a few times over a period of time, and kind of let people have that chance to settle into it a little bit. It's a challenge. I don't know. I don't really know the answer to that question, except that I think we put a huge burden on ourselves by expecting people to understand the things we're communicating about in a very short period of time. And I believe we also do a disservice to those people, because we also expect them to grasp these things in a very short period of time. And when they don't, we often blame it on them. These people aren't data literate.
Sure.
Right? And that doesn't help. That is not helping to address inequities. And so
it's not helpful to just blame the audience.
Yeah, right. And I think this is like a way that I'm not sure we've considered about. Like, maybe it's just not feasible to ask people to do these kind of very quick pieces of learning when our brains aren't really. That's not how it works.
Sure.
And I know that that's not a new idea, but I would love to hear people's thoughts. And it's like, it's like a really, and at the end of the day, a kind of challenge for us to try to understand how we do things at longer scales. It seems like it conflicts, but we have like all these really urgent issues. But I think in order to really do a good job with those urgent issues, we need to be able to stretch out the time at which we're talking to people about them.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know you, but I personally think, and I think a lot of people would say the same about themselves, my attention span has gotten, less and less, probably with cell phones in my pocket that have the internet. So
yeah, I mean, writing the book was really amazing because, a book is time spent with a reader.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you cannot read my book in minutes. You have to read it over hours. And so I have a chance to sit with people, often for hours, more often for days, often for weeks, sometimes for months. And that's an amazing thing to be able to have that share of somebody's mind for that long.
Totally. As the field continues to emerge, do you think there's anything unique about data visualization as a practice for addressing the world at these scopes that you've talked about?
Well, I mean, so many of the problems that we're facing, or the things that we need to talk about, are data things. Coronavirus is just such a good example of it. Like the methods we have to communicate, or the thing we need to communicate to people, is often numbers. And so, how do we do that is a challenge that visualization in particular is kind of suited for. I used to teach classes on data visualization, but I changed that name when I got to New York in 2010. I taught a class called data representation to get us out of the word visualization on its own, because I think we can break ourselves out. And everyone's heard about sonification and, in some case, physicalization, but in a siloed sense, we hear about those things, and it just can be helpful for your brain. Even when you're, again, I'm going to go back to Leah's talk about sketching. Even when you're sketching, even if you know for sure that this project is not going to be in any other medium other than a visual medium, it's cool to think in your head about how it could be. I'm looking at your background, like how it could be built in bricks, or how it could be represented by temperature of water or something like that, because that like gets you into a different mode of thinking. And I think often we follow a pathway as data visualization people, in which we kind of learn, and that pathway is it's a narrow tunnel, and the wider you can open it up, the better. I give my students I have students that often are doing thesis, and they'll come to me and they'll be like, I'm stuck on my thesis. That's the most often thing that people come to me in office hours, and I give them an assignment. It's called 50 Bad Ideas. Yes. And the assignment is that you have to do 50 ideas, and they have to be bad. Intentionally bad. and some of the secrets that I give people, are to break out of it and be like, okay, it's gonna take 2 years of Saturdays for this project to unfold. And you're probably never going to use those ideas, but it's like a nice mental exercise to remind ourselves that we become kind of templated into thinking certain ways. And to break out of those things. It doesn't mean to discard the rules we know about, like cognitive burden or whatever those things are, but it means just to open your mind a little bit wider.
Yeah, and you were saying that, did you call it a data representation course instead of data visualization? Yeah. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
I'm curious with the data representation course, what kinds of representation do you cover?
So I don't teach this class anymore, actually. I taught it for 2 years, and then I taught a class called Data Art, and then I taught a class called Data Publics, and now I teach a class called How to Count Birds. So,
what an evolution! I love it.
But I had a student. I'm just going to come up with like some things that pop into my mind, and these are by no means like the ones that are the only projects. But I had a student that made spice rubs out of every borough of New York City that were like spiced by the like traditional spices of the city, and then she did it over time, so you could like go and taste Staten Island in 1980 and then taste it again. So in like 1980, you were like, it's just like all European and like Irish flavors. Like I think there was like, bourbon powder or whiskey powder or something like that, like really stereotypical. But now like Staten Island is actually a pretty diverse borough. And so people don't usually think about it that way. So it's like Vietnamese spices and things like that. I thought that was a really nice way of doing the work because it's, first of all, it's just kind of fun, but it also suggests a way to talk about this that's social. Right? It's like, let's get together and make some barbecue or make some wings, and let's talk about like these things. And that's not somebody I think who I don't know, maybe they went on for a career about spice rubs, but I like to think that these kind of challenges get you to work in different ways. And I had a lot of students who would do performances where they would sing the data or like play the data on whatever musical instruments, and so that was a really fun project because people, even the people who came to the class to learn about data visualization, like kind of came out of it with all kinds of new ideas.
Yeah, we have a follow-up question to something you said a second ago. You talked about doing a class on data publics. What is data publics about?
Well, yeah, so it's about, first of all, putting data into public space, but then also interrogating this idea of what is public data. Mm-hmm. This is also a big part of the book, right? What we understand as public data, is often really gate kept. There's fences around it, and that you have to be technically adept to access the data, to get via the API or wherever it comes from. And so, my challenge is to like make it less like of that kind of public, but more like public in the as we talk about a public library or public park, like something that is intentionally invitation. There's an intentional invite to people who wouldn't normally come in. Like every library has to have a wheelchair ramp. They have to be super accessible. Like, what does that look like for data? Like, are there ways that we can really make sure that data is available to everybody? And that was a huge part of the class as well. I teach about things that I don't quite understand, and so when I was teaching that data,
it's a good way to learn more about them.
Yeah, no, it's awesome, right? And that's always that's always the opening thing with the students. It's like, hey, we're going to learn about this together, and the first day that class and these other classes, it's just great to say like this is unmarked territory in a lot of ways, and so it's kind of up to us to make work that suggests new ideas, and that was really really exciting and rewarding. And again, people would come up with ideas that I think were really really thoughtful and important.
Yeah, and it sounds like sometimes you were all learning together in a way.
Yeah, totally. And that's what I wanted to bring with this talk as well. It's like, I don't know. I really feel there is something for us to be talking about together about what does it mean to speak about topics over longer durations and engage with that type of learning that we don't normally do. So I hope somebody knows more than I do.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we're like running up on time, but one last question that's unrelated to your talk. I'm curious, how excited are you that IO gets to be back now?
Yeah, so
we had a 2-year respite.
Yeah, so excited. Yeah, as you
know,
bought
my ticket already.
Our 10-year anniversary, and we were so excited, and we like curated this what I think is a really spectacular list of people, and then had to not do it. And so now we're going to do it, and it's mostly the same people again. And so, yeah, it's going to be great. I hope people will consider coming. We at the end of February, we'll release applications for our artist and nonprofit fellowships, which are a good way for people who might not normally have the pocket money to go to a conference like ours to have a chance to come. But then, yeah, if you have a company that can pay your ticket, then you should get them to buy you one.
Awesome. Well, Jer, thanks so much for the talk and the Q&A. It was super interesting. And
yeah, great. Hey, thanks to everybody, and people can reach out. I'm really happy to talk to them. I'm pretty easy to find.
Cool. Thanks, Jer.
All right. Thanks, Molly. Bye.